All right, folks, buckle up. We're diving into some seriously deep waters today with Baruch Spinoza's Ethics.
It's a book with quite the reputation, wouldn't you say?
Definitely not light reading material, but
Oh, it's incredibly rewarding, though. A true philosophical masterpiece.
absolutely. And it's had a huge impact, influencing thinkers for centuries. Really mind-blowing insights in this one.
Oh, yeah. Especially relevant for, well, those who really like to, grapple with complex ideas, people who want to push those boundaries of how we usually think about things.
Absolutely. So Spinoza's Ethics,
hmm
published back in 1677, posthumously. And let me tell you, it caused a stir.
Oh, yeah, it did.
Can you set the scene for us a bit?
Okay, so picture this. It's 17th century Europe. The scientific revolution is in full swing.
Right.
Traditional beliefs, they're being challenged left and right, and there's this huge thirst for knowledge, but not just any knowledge, knowledge based on reason, on
A
observation.
real intellectual ferment, right?
Exactly. And Spinoza, who was a lens grinder, by the way, but a philosopher at heart, he steps right into this whirlwind of ideas with a pretty radical notion. God is nature,
Mhm.
and nature, that's God.
Well, hold on a second. Let's unpack that a bit. What exactly do we mean when we say God is nature?
Well, it's called pantheism.
Okay.
So Spinoza didn't believe in a God who was separate, supernatural, sitting up there on a cloud somewhere. No, for him, God was the essence of the universe itself, the very fabric of it. He even used that Latin phrase, Deus sive natura, meaning God or nature, to really drive home that unity.
But the universe isn't just created by God, it is God.
Precisely.
Wow. That's a big one.
It had huge implications, philosophically, theologically, the whole nine yards. I mean, here he is challenging their whole traditional view of God, transcendent God intervening in the world. He's putting forward something way more imminent, way more interconnected.
So where do we fit in then? If everything is God, what does that make us humans?
Good question. Spinoza saw us as modes, expressions, really, of God's attributes. Imagine the universe like a giant ocean. God is the ocean itself. And we're like individual waves, each one expressing something different, something unique about that vast, infinite ocean.
Okay, I could see that. That's a powerful image.
It is.
But it definitely raises some more questions. Like, what about our minds and bodies? How does Spinoza square those with his idea that everything is, part of this one substance?
Okay, so that's where his concept of parallelism comes in. Now, remember Descartes, another big thinker of that time. He believed that mind and body were completely separate things, totally different substances.
Yeah.
Well, Spinoza, he disagreed. He said, no. Mind and body, there's just two different ways of understanding the same reality, like two sides of the same coin.
So it's not that my mind is controlling my body or my body is controlling my mind. They're both just expressions of the same underlying stuff.
Exactly. And it's a remarkably modern idea when you think about it. I mean, look at neuroscience today. We're discovering more and more about the incredibly intricate links between our thoughts, our feelings, and what's actually happening physically in our bodies.
Right. Like how stress can manifest physically or how exercise can affect your mood.
Yeah, exactly. Spinoza was onto something there, for sure.
Centuries ahead of his time.
Absolutely. And that idea, that parallelism, it's key to understanding how Spinoza saw humans fitting into this whole pantheistic framework. It's all connected.
All right, so we're part of this interconnected web, expressions of God or nature. But what about, like, our individual experiences, our emotions, desires, all that messy human stuff? Where does that fit in?
That's the million-dollar question. And it takes us to one of the most interesting parts of ethics.
Yeah.
Spinoza's analysis of human emotions.
No, that's where things get juicy. Emotions always fascinate me.
Spinoza, too. He spent a lot of time dissecting them, trying to understand them, breaking them down into their basic parts, and really exploring how they influence us, how they affect our thoughts and actions.
So like a 17th century psychologist?
In a way, yeah, he had such a systematic approach to them, really analytical. He was convinced that all emotions, even the ones that seemed totally irrational, stemmed from a fundamental drive for self-preservation. He called it conatus.
Conatus. Sounds pretty intense. What does it actually mean, though?
Think of it like this. It's an inherent drive within us all to persevere, to exist, to thrive, to become the best versions of ourselves. And this isn't just about physical survival either. It's about seeking knowledge, understanding, fulfillment. It's about becoming who we truly are.
So even if I'm, say, learning a new language or trying to write a novel or training for a marathon, that's all connected to this conatus.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the driving force behind every thought, every feeling, every action we take. And Spinoza believed that if we could really grasp this concept, if we could truly understand conatus, we could gain control over our emotions and live much more fulfilling lives.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about how Spinoza connected this conatus to specific emotions. Like, how did he explain all the different ways we feel?
Well, he started with the idea that joy and sadness are the two most fundamental emotions.
Okay.
Joy, he said, arises when we perceive an increase in our power to act, when we feel more capable, more in control. While sadness, that points to a decrease in that power. And all the other emotions. He saw them as complex variations, combinations of those two basic states.
So, like, if I'm feeling joyful, it's because I feel like I'm growing, I'm becoming more able, and if I'm sad, it's because I feel stuck or powerless.
Exactly. And Spinoza went deep analyzing how these emotions interact with external causes, how they shape our perceptions and actions. He even created this whole system, like a taxonomy of emotions, breaking them down into all their subtle variations.
Wow, he was mapping out the human heart. But this raises an interesting question. If all of our emotions are rooted in conatus, this drive for self-preservation, doesn't that make us fundamentally selfish?
Ah, that's a common misunderstanding. Spinoza was very clear that true joy, true fulfillment doesn't come from narrowly pursuing our own self-interest. It comes from understanding and aligning ourselves with the interconnected nature of reality.
So it's not about denying our emotions, but about understanding where they're coming from and how they fit into the bigger picture.
Precisely. And that leads us to one of Spinoza's most radical and liberating ideas, his concept of freedom.
Okay, I'm all ears. Because if everything is determined by God or nature, like Spinoza says, how can we possibly have free will? That seems like a contradiction.
It's a paradox, isn't it? But for Spinoza, freedom wasn't about choosing between different options. It wasn't about defying fate.
So what was it about?
Understanding. It was about recognizing how our desires, our actions are shaped by all these causes, both inside us and outside us, and then aligning ourselves with the natural order of things, not fighting against it, but flowing with it.
So instead of resisting what's happening, we find freedom by understanding it, by accepting it.
Exactly. And that understanding comes through knowledge. The more we know about ourselves, about the world, about the causes and effects that shape our lives, the freer we become.
I think I'm starting to get it. But it still sounds a little like, I don't know, surrendering to fate, like we're just along for the ride.
Not quite. Remember, for Spinoza, we are a part of God or nature. We're not separate beings being controlled by some external force. We are that force expressing itself through us.
So our actions, even though they're determined, are still expressions of our own nature, which is ultimately divine.
Exactly. And by using our reason, by striving to understand ourselves and the world around us, we tap into that divine power and become more fully ourselves. We become who we were meant to be.
Wow, this is pretty mind-blowing stuff. So if freedom comes from understanding, from aligning ourselves with this cosmic flow, where does it all lead? What's the ultimate goal?
To a state of profound joy and fulfillment, Spinoza called it blessedness or beatitudo in Latin, and he believed the path to this blessedness was through something he called intellectual love of God.
Okay, now we're getting really metaphysical. Break that down for me. What is intellectual love of God?
It's not about worshiping a deity in the traditional sense. It's about reaching a state of deep understanding. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things, feeling awe and wonder at the beauty and order of the universe. It's about seeing the divine in everything.
So it's a kind of spiritual awakening, but grounded in reason and knowledge, not faith.
Exactly. It's that aha moment when you see the intricate web of connections in nature, when you realize everything is part of this grand unfolding story, and you feel this profound sense of peace and acceptance. It's about transcending our limited, ego-centered perspective and embracing a broader, more interconnected view of reality.
You know, it's almost like that feeling you get when you look up at the stars on a clear night. You feel so small, yet so connected to something much greater than yourself.
That's a perfect example.
So Spinoza is saying that by cultivating this intellectual love of God, we can experience true joy and liberation, even in a world where everything is determined.
Precisely. Because when we understand and accept the necessity of things, when we see ourselves as part of this grand interconnected tapestry, our individual struggles and desires fade into the background. We find peace and joy in simply being, in participating in this eternal flow of existence.
It's a profound idea, for sure. And it makes you think, if we really are all connected like this, what does that mean for how we live our lives, how we treat each other, how we care for the planet?
Exactly. That's something worth pondering.
It is. And it makes you wonder, what other insights did Spinoza have about how to live a good, meaningful life? That's something I'm definitely interested in exploring further.
Me too. And luckily, there's a lot more to unpack in ethics.
There is so much more to discover in this deep dive.
Speaking of interconnectedness, that actually leads us nicely to another fascinating aspect of Spinoza's thought, his concept of the three types of knowledge.
Okay, three types of knowledge, huh? I'm intrigued. What are we talking about here? Something more than just, like, book smarts, I'm guessing.
Definitely. Spinoza believed that there were three distinct ways that we come to understand the world. He called them imagination, reason, and then something he called intuitive knowledge.
Okay, so let's break those down a bit. What did Spinoza mean by imagination?
Well, for him, imagination was the knowledge that we get through our senses, through our everyday experiences. It's based on appearances, on how things seem to us, rather than on a deep understanding of their true nature.
Ah, okay. So it's kind of like mistaking a shadow for a monster in the dark.
Exactly, or being fooled by an optical illusion.
Right. Our senses can trick us.
They can. Imagination is powerful for sure, but it can definitely lead us astray.
So how do we move beyond those limitations? Is that where reason comes in?
Precisely. Reason, for Spinoza, was all about using logic and deduction. Really trying to understand the underlying causes of things, the principles at work. It's about going deeper than the surface level, grasping those connections, those relationships that actually govern reality.
So it's like instead of just observing what a machine does, you're taking it apart, figuring out how all the gears and levers work together to make it function.
That's a great analogy. Reason allows us to move beyond just what we see and experience directly, helps us build a more accurate, more complete picture of the world.
Okay, so imagination provides the raw data, and then reason helps us organize it and make sense of it. But what about the third type? Intuitive knowledge. That sounds pretty mysterious.
It is, a bit. Spinoza described it as a kind of direct grasp of the truth, an immediate insight, almost like a flash of understanding going beyond logic and reason.
So it's like those aha moments we all have, where something suddenly clicks into place.
Exactly. It's about seeing the unity and interconnectedness of all things, but not just on an intellectual level, on a deeper, almost instinctual level.
That sounds amazing, but also kind of elusive. Like, how do you cultivate that kind of intuitive knowledge?
Well, Spinoza believed it comes through a combination of things. It's about using reason, engaging in contemplation, and living a virtuous life.
So it's not just about thinking your way to enlightenment. It's about living in a way that's aligned with that understanding.
Absolutely. For Spinoza, knowledge wasn't just some abstract pursuit. It was deeply connected to how we lived, how we acted in the world.
Okay, so we've got these three types of knowledge:
Yeah.
imagination, reason, and intuitive knowledge.
Yeah.
How did Spinoza see them working together? Was it a kind of team effort?
He definitely saw them as interconnected. Yeah. He believed they formed a kind of hierarchy, with intuitive knowledge at the very top. So you start with imagination, that's your base level, your raw data. Then reason comes in to help you make sense of that data, see the patterns and relationships. And finally, if you keep climbing, you reach intuitive knowledge, where you can grasp the deeper meaning, the true significance of it all.
So it's like, I don't know, climbing a mountain. You start at the base camp, use your map and compass to navigate the trail, and eventually you reach the summit, where you have this incredible panoramic view. You can see everything laid out before you.
I like that analogy. And for Spinoza, this ascent, this journey of knowledge, wasn't just about intellectual fulfillment. It was also about ethical development, about becoming a better person.
Okay, so we're back to that idea of living a virtuous life. How did Spinoza connect knowledge and ethics? Did he see them as going hand in hand?
Oh, he absolutely did. He believed that true knowledge naturally leads to ethical behavior. In other words, the more we understand about the interconnected nature of reality, the more we see ourselves as part of a larger whole. And that understanding, that sense of connection, makes us want to act in ways that benefit not just ourselves, but everyone, everything.
So it's not about following a set of rules, but acting from a place of understanding, of compassion, of recognizing that we're all in this together.
Exactly. Spinoza believed that true freedom and fulfillment come not from chasing after selfish desires, but from aligning ourselves with the good of the whole.
You know, it's interesting. Some of these ideas, they sound a bit like certain Eastern philosophies, like with their emphasis on interconnectedness and compassion.
That's a good observation. Spinoza's thought was influenced by a lot of different sources, from ancient Greek philosophy to medieval Jewish mysticism. And yes, even some Eastern ideas probably made their way in there too.
So he was really a bridge between all these different intellectual traditions. He was taking the best of what he'd learned and blending it into something new, something groundbreaking.
He was, and that's what makes studying his work so fascinating, so relevant, even today. His ideas give us a framework for understanding ourselves, the world around us, and how we can live more meaningful, more fulfilling lives.
I can definitely see that. It's
Yeah.
making me think differently about a lot of things. And it makes me want to learn more about Spinoza's life, too. What kind of person was he? What were his influences?
He was a fascinating figure, lived a pretty unconventional life, actually. We could do a whole deep dive just on Spinoza himself.
Maybe we should. But for now, I'm still really curious about that whole immortality thing. We touched on it earlier, but I'm not sure I fully grasped it. How did Spinoza reconcile this idea of everything being determined with the idea of, some kind of life after death?
Yeah, good question. This is where Spinoza gets really, really interesting. See, he didn't believe in an afterlife in the traditional sense, heaven, hell, pearly gates, all that.
No harps and angels.
Not exactly, but he did believe in a form of immortality, one that's tied to his concept of God or nature being eternal, unchanging.
Okay, so walk me through this. How does that work?
Well, remember how we talked about the human mind being a mode of God's infinite intellect, like a tiny spark of that universal consciousness?
Right.
So for Spinoza, even though our individual bodies might cease to exist, the knowledge and understanding we've gained, those become part of that eternal tapestry of thought.
So it's not about my personal soul surviving. It's about my contributions to knowledge living on.
In a way, yeah, it's about the enduring impact of our thoughts, our ideas. They become a part of that eternal, ever unfolding story of the universe.
That is a powerful thought. Like, even after we're gone, the things we've learned, the insights we've shared, they can continue to ripple outward, influencing others.
Exactly. It highlights how important it is to seek knowledge, not just for our own personal gain, but for its own sake, to contribute to that eternal realm of understanding.
It's like our own small way of participating in the divine.
In a way, yes. And that brings us to another key aspect of Spinoza's philosophy, his ideas about social and political order.
Okay, so we're moving from the individual to the collective. How did Spinoza think we should live together? What did he believe made a good society?
Well, remember, he was writing in the 17th century, a time of huge social and political upheaval. Wars, religious conflicts, new ideas about individual rights, and government emerging left and right.
Sounds a bit like today, actually.
It does, doesn't it? And like always, Spinoza went back to the fundamentals. He believed that understanding human nature and recognizing that interconnectedness of all things was key to creating a just and harmonious society.
So how did he apply those ideas to, like, actual political systems and stuff? What kind of government did he think was best?
He was a big advocate for democracy, actually, a democratic republic specifically. He believed that was the most rational and just form of government because it recognized the inherent dignity and freedom of every individual.
That's pretty radical for the 17th century. Most of Europe was still ruled by kings and queens back then.
It was. But Spinoza believed that giving citizens a say in how they were governed, protecting individual rights under the rule of law, that was the best way to achieve a balance between individual freedom and social responsibility.
Ah, there's that balance again.
Hmm.
Individual and collective. He seemed to keep coming back to that, doesn't he?
He does, and for him, education was a crucial part of this whole equation. Spinoza believed that an educated citizenry was absolutely essential for a healthy democracy.
Makes sense. You need people who can think for themselves, make informed decisions.
Exactly. He wanted people to be able to think critically, to engage in reasoned debate, to participate effectively in governing themselves. He believed that education empowered people to do all of that.
Wow, that's powerful. It makes me think about the state of education today, the role it plays in our own society. Big questions there.
Big questions indeed, and it all ties back to this core idea in Spinoza's philosophy. The idea that true freedom comes not from blind obedience or following dogma, but from understanding, from using our reason, from engaging in open and honest dialogue with each other.
So we've covered a lot of ground here with Spinoza. We've talked about God, nature, the mind, emotions, even immortality. We've touched on his ideas about politics, society, education.
Yeah.
It's amazing how all these different threads seem to weave together in his philosophy.
It is, and there's still so much more we could explore.
There is. But for now, I'm thinking about what all of this means for us. How can we take these ideas, these insights, and apply them to our own lives?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How do we live in a way that honors that interconnectedness, that embraces reason and understanding, that strives to create a more just and compassionate world?
Big questions. but definitely worth pondering.
They are. And that's what Spinoza would have wanted us to do, to keep thinking, keep questioning, keep searching for that deeper understanding.
Keep diving deep.
So we've talked about some pretty big ideas: God, nature, freedom, all that.
Mind-blowing stuff. But I'm wondering, how does all this philosophy translate into, like, actually living a good life? Did Spinoza have anything to say about, ethics,
Mm.
practical advice for how to be a good person?
Absolutely, he did. In fact, the full title of his book is Ethics, Demonstrated in Geometrical Order.
Right, right. It's like he's saying there's a logical, almost mathematical way to figure out how to live.
Exactly. And for Spinoza, ethics was all about understanding our place in the universe, seeing how we're all connected. He believed that true happiness, or blessedness, as he called it, comes from aligning ourselves with that natural order.
Okay, I get that in theory, but what does it look like in practice? How do we actually do that? Align ourselves, I mean.
Well, remember that concept we talked about, Kanadas? That drive to persevere, to thrive?
Yeah, to become the best versions of ourselves.
Right. Spinoza believed that true blessedness doesn't come from just chasing our own selfish desires, but from understanding them, seeing how they're connected to that bigger picture.
So it's not about denying our desires, but about understanding them, right?
Exactly. For example, let's say you're feeling jealous of someone's success. A purely ego-driven response might be to try to tear them down, right? But Spinoza would say that actually harms you in the long run because it disrupts that harmony, that interconnectedness that leads to true fulfillment.
So a more Spinozan approach would be to, like, examine those feelings of jealousy, see where they're coming from, maybe even turn them into something positive, like inspiration to work harder to improve yourself.
Exactly. It's a shift in mindset from scarcity and competition to abundance and cooperation,
Yeah.
recognizing that we're all in this together.
Makes sense, like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. And this idea of interconnectedness, it has huge implications for everything: how we treat each other, how we relate to the world around us.
So in a truly Spinozan society, what would that look like?
Well, Spinoza was a big advocate for democracy, for individual freedom, but he also emphasized responsibility.
Right, that balance again, individual and collective.
Exactly. He believed a just society allows people to pursue their own good, but in a way that also promotes the common good. And education, he thought, was key to making that happen.
Because an educated person is more likely to make responsible choices, to think about the impact of their actions.
Precisely. Spinoza believed that an educated citizenry is essential for a healthy democracy. People need to be able to think critically, engage in reasoned debate, make informed decisions.
That's so important today, especially. We're bombarded with information from all sides. We need those critical thinking skills now more than ever.
I agree. And Spinoza reminds us that knowledge, understanding, it's not just an intellectual pursuit, it's a deeply ethical one. The more we understand about the world, the more we see how interconnected we all are, the more we're driven to act for the good of the whole.
Wow, we've really gone deep with Spinoza today. It's been a journey. But one thing that sticks with me is this idea that true happiness, that blessedness, is not about what we acquire. It's about understanding. Understanding ourselves, understanding the world, understanding our place in it all.
Absolutely. It's about seeing the bigger picture, recognizing that we're all part of something much greater than ourselves.
And that's a pretty inspiring thought to end on, don't you think? That even though we're individuals, we're all connected. And that connection, that's where true fulfillment lies.
I think Spinoza would agree with that.
He would. Well, thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into Spinoza's ethics. It's been a truly enlightening experience.
Really my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep seeking that deeper understanding. Because as we've learned from Spinoza, the more we understand, the freer we become. Until next time, keep diving deep.